Before we begin this story, if you enjoy dark mysteries, unexplained disappearances, and mind-bending stories, subscribe now and turn on notifications, because here, each story can take you further than you imagine. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The mansion stood isolated, nestled into a hill that made it visible from afar, but almost impossible to reach without following the uneven stone path that snaked through the dense woods. It was an imposing building, with tall towers, antique stained-glass windows, and a facade that blended 19th-century charm with obvious signs of partial neglect. Inside, long, silent corridors gave the impression that each door held a secret, each painting hanging on the walls silently observed. The estate's heir, Jonathan Whittaker, a 25-year-old heir, was known for his sharp intelligence and insatiable curiosity. He had studied at renowned universities, traveled the world, and seemed to have control of his life until last summer, when his behavior began to change. Small actions, such as staying up late exploring old family archives, began to bother the servants, who whispered about his obsession with discovering what no one should ever know. The implicit antagonist in this scenario was the inheritance itself, family pressure, and secrets buried for generations. The Whittaker family kept documents that could tarnish historical reputations, records that spoke of obscure agreements and unsolved disappearances of ancestors. The mansion, more than a home, functioned as a labyrinth of memories and mysteries that Jonathan stubbornly felt compelled to decipher. That autumn night, the wind whistled through the cracks in the windows, and dry leaves swirled in eddies in the outside corridors. Jonathan went down to the library, lit only by a desk lamp that cast long shadows on the bookshelves. The room smelled of old wood and mildew, and instinctively he sensed something strange. The air was heavy, almost as if someone had recently been there, even though all the servants were in their rooms. He opened one of the old volumes, a 19th-century diary, and began to read about mysterious disappearances that had occurred in the mansion itself. Each page narrated events that in some way echoed the present. Accounts of heirs who vanished without a trace, secret midnight meetings, hidden safes, and locked doors that no one had ever managed to open. The feeling of being watched grew gradually, and he felt a shiver run down his spine. As Jonathan explored, subtle sounds could be heard. Light footsteps on the wooden floor, the creaking of a door being touched, whispers that seemed to come from the walls. He pressed the book against his chest, trying to rationalize, but instinct warned him of something that transcended academic curiosity. The mystery he sought to unravel might not be merely historical, it could be dangerous, perhaps fatal. Outside, the night deepened, and the moon timidly appeared between heavy clouds. The feeling of isolation grew with each passing minute. Jonathan knew that any decision could change everything. Opening that forbidden door could reveal what no one in the family had dared to touch, but it could also seal his fate. There was a palpable tension in the air that could not be ignored. He took a deep breath and, for a moment, considered returning to his room, but curiosity was stronger than fear. When he finally reached a door at the end of the hallway, he noticed something that chilled his blood. Recent handprints on the dusty wood, as if someone or something had been there just moments before. Jonathan hesitantly reached out and touched the cold doorknob. The sound of the metal echoed through the silent hallway. It was at that moment that the door opened slowly by itself, revealing a room that seemed frozen in time, with furniture covered in white sheets and pictures facing the wall. What lay hidden inside was not merely an old object or document. There was a presence, almost tangible, that made the lamp's light flicker. Jonathan took a step, then another. As the feeling of being watched became unbearable, his heart raced, and a growing certainty settled in. That night would change everything. Little did he know that the door he had just opened would be the last thing he touched before disappearing. The silence of the mansion was not merely an absence of sound. It was a warning, a preparation for what was about to happen. And that night, between ancestral walls and family secrets, Jonathan Whittaker would cease to be just a curious heir and become part of the very mystery that had haunted his family for generations. Whittaker Manor was not merely a building, but a microcosm of family secrets and traditions that had accumulated over more than 2 centuries. Each corridor held memories. Each room possessed objects that told stories of ancestors whose lives were shrouded in mystery. The floorboards creaked in a peculiar way, as if each step echoed to warn of the dangers of venturing beyond what should be known. The Victorian architecture contrasted with the modernity of some recent additions, such as the Heir's private laboratory, where ancient documents and artifacts were meticulously catalogued. Besides Jonathan, other characters played crucial roles in that oppressive environment. Margaret, the middle-aged governess, was a rigid and reserved woman with a deep knowledge of the family history. Her eyes, though attentive, rarely showed emotion, but small gestures betrayed her silent fear. She knew stories that weren't in books, rumors whispered by ancestors, and she was careful to guide Jonathan without revealing details that might disturb him too soon. The gardener, Thomas, was another silent observer. He had worked at the mansion for decades and knew every path, every secret entrance, every forgotten architectural trap. His hands were calloused, and his precise movements betrayed years of experience, but he carried a constant tension, as if he sensed that this year would be different from the previous ones. Thomas maintained a respectful distance from the heir, although the glances they exchanged demonstrated a mutual understanding. Both felt that the mansion held more than anyone could imagine. The external environment reflected the internal climate. The surrounding woods were dense, with tall trees that blocked much of the sunlight, creating shadows that shifted with the wind. The uneven and slippery stone paths tested the attention and courage of any visitor. Small details, such as broken branches or partially erased footprints, suggested that someone or something moved there during the night. These elements not only complemented the narrative, but also directly influenced the decisions of Jonathan and the other characters, forcing them to act cautiously. The old documents, scattered throughout the laboratory and library, revealed secrets ranging from shady financial dealings to unsolved disappearances. There were old maps of the property, letters exchanged with local politicians, and diaries that mentioned events that official history never recorded. Each item carried weight and implications, and Jonathan was determined to decipher them, even without fully understanding the risks involved. The cultural and historical past of the United States naturally intertwined with the plot. Small details, such as local festivities, the region's agricultural calendar, and specific traditions of the South, influenced the routine of the mansion. These elements, far from being mere background, shaped interactions, decisions, and the pace of Jonathan's discoveries. For example, an old family tradition required certain rooms to remain locked until specific dates, a rule that Jonathan always defied, accelerating the tension and unpredictability of the narrative. By delving deeper into the secondary characters, it becomes clear that they all carry layers of motivation and fear. Margaret doesn't act solely out of discipline. Her loyalty masks legitimate concerns about the dangers of the mansion. Thomas isn't just a gardener. His knowledge of secret passages and past events suggests he understands more about the disappearance than he lets on. These elements enrich the narrative, making the world more believable and immersive, while maintaining the focus on Jonathan and his growing obsession with the family's secrets. As the night wore on, the mansion seemed to close in on itself. Every noise, every shadow, every architectural detail became part of the mental and physical labyrinth in which Jonathan found himself. The tension grew, and even the supporting characters were compelled to act or react, strengthening the suspense and deepening the feeling that something extraordinary and macabre was about to happen. The following morning, the mansion seemed quieter than ever. Jonathan awoke with the feeling that the previous night had left invisible traces, imprinted not only on the walls, but on his own body and mind. He knew that every step in the library, every gesture toward the old files, brought him closer to answers that might be too dangerous to reveal. The laboratory was meticulously organized, but new notes, seemingly written by unknown hands, appeared in his folders, suggesting that someone or something was watching his every move. Margaret, the housekeeper, noticed the young heir's unease and subtly tried to warn him. "Not everything should be discovered at once," she said, choosing her words carefully, but Jonathan interpreted it as a provocation, feeling challenged to delve deeper. Thomas, the gardener, offered only long, silent glances, gestures that betrayed knowledge of secret passages that could either save or condemn the heir. The tension between them wasn't explicit, but every action carried weight, and every omission created new layers of suspense. While exploring a hallway he'd never noticed before, Jonathan found a half-hidden door behind a bookcase. The wood was marked with recent scratches, signs that someone had entered or left unnoticed. He opened the door and found a small, abandoned office with a dust-covered desk, scattered papers, and an old typewriter. Among the documents, a letter caught his eye. It was dated decades ago, but mentioned events that seemed to resonate in the present. The letter spoke of disappearances, obscure family agreements, and a safe that should never be opened. The sense of danger became more concrete when objects began to move on their own, albeit almost imperceptibly. Books fell from shelves, shadows stretched in strange ways, and the sound of footsteps echoed in empty corridors. Jonathan began to feel that the mansion was not just a physical place, but a living organism, aware of his curiosity and ready to react. Each attempt to delve into the mystery brought immediate consequences, from small flaws in the plan to invisible threats that induced fear and anxiety. The protagonist's internal conflict also intensified. He struggled between logic and superstition, between the desire to discover the truth and the fear of disappearing like his predecessors. Each secondary character contributed to this tension, Margaret with her veiled warnings, Thomas with fragmented information about secret passages and past events. The environment itself became an antagonist, reacting to the heir's ambition and curiosity. Jonathan then decided to confront what he perceived as a presence within the mansion. He followed clues left in old diaries, compared maps of the property, and searched secret passages revealed by Thomas. Each discovery deepened the mystery and the feeling of imminent danger. He found symbols engraved on the walls, mysterious dates that coincided with old disappearances, and records linking family members to events that official history would never mention. Everything indicated that the disappearance was not an isolated accident, but part of a pattern that repeated itself across generations. As he investigated the mansion's basement, Jonathan felt time becoming relative. The profound silence amplified every sound, the echo of his own breath, the clinking of metal, the creaking of ancient floorboards. He realized his obsession was leading him down the same path as heirs who had disappeared without explanation. The psychological pressure mounted, and his decisions needed to be quick, precise, but not hasty. Every wrong step could seal the same fate that had terrorized his family for decades. The external conflict, the mystery of the disappearance, the strange behavior of the mansion, the invisible presence, now intertwined with the internal conflict. Jonathan needed to balance courage and caution, curiosity and prudence. Each secondary character, each detail of the setting and each old document became a piece in a deadly game of chess where any wrong move could be irreversible. The suspense increased as night fell, bringing with it a sense of urgency, as if the mansion itself demanded immediate answers. At the end of this stage of the conflict, Jonathan finds himself in a corridor he had never noticed before, where locked doors and walls covered in ancient symbols suggest that the truth is about to be revealed. But before he could advance, a dry sound echoed behind him, making him turn quickly. Nothing was visible, but the certainty that something or someone was watching him transformed curiosity into genuine fear. The game of disappearance intensified, and the mansion, more than ever, seemed alive, ready to test the determination and sanity of anyone who dared to challenge its secrets. As Jonathan continued to explore the mansion, smaller subplots began to unfold around him, adding layers of tension to the main conflict. Margaret, the housekeeper, was grappling with a personal dilemma. She knew more about the previous disappearances than she was willing to reveal. For years, she had protected the family, hiding clues and documents that could compromise her reputation and the safety of the heirs. However, as Jonathan delved deeper into the mysteries, Margaret realized her loyalty would be tested, and perhaps she would have to make a choice that could change everything. Thomas, the gardener, also faced his own subplot. He carried a memory of a Whittaker family ancestor who had disappeared in a similar way, and saw in Jonathan a repetition of the past. The awareness that he might be unable to prevent another disaster pressured him to act more cautiously, but he also knew that the truth needed to be confronted. Thus, while Jonathan investigated, Thomas discreetly left small clues, opening doors or signs that only a keen observer could notice. Each gesture carried meaning, creating a silent tension that only increased the suspense. The mansion itself functioned as a labyrinth of subplots, secret passages, corridors that changed according to the lighting or movement, and hidden rooms created physical and psychological challenges for Jonathan. The ancient architecture, full of peculiarities, revealed secrets only to those who were attentive to the subtlest details. Symbols engraved on the walls, marks of recently moved furniture, objects displaced almost imperceptibly. Each discovery, however small, seemed to point to something bigger, creating a network of interconnected mysteries that Jonathan needed to decipher. The relationship between Jonathan and the secondary characters also gained additional nuances. Margaret, although rigid and reserved, began to show moments of vulnerability, revealing in silent gestures that she understood the dangers surrounding the young man. Thomas, on the other hand, oscillated between guidance and warning, offering help only when he saw that Jonathan might misinterpret his intentions. These subtle interactions added layers of emotional complexity without resorting to lengthy dialogues or unnecessary exposition. Time was becoming a critical factor. The sense of urgency grew with each passing day, while seemingly random events indicated that something was about to happen. Small accidents, such as doors closing on their own or objects falling without explanation, served as signs that the mansion was testing the heir. The time pressure not only accelerated the pace of the narrative, but also forced Jonathan to make quick decisions, balancing fear and curiosity. At the same time, clues about the disappearance of his predecessors emerged in a fragmented way. Jonathan found diaries, letters, and records that suggested each previous heir had faced similar challenges, but no one had ever returned to tell the complete story. Each document revealed new layers of mystery, some stories intertwined with historical events in the region, while others seemed to involve secret family conflicts and silent pacts made for generations. A particularly relevant subplot involved an old friend of Jonathan's who had recently returned to town. Unbeknownst to him, this friend began to play an indirect role in the plot, triggering events that Jonathan interpreted as coincidences, but which were in fact important pieces of the puzzle. This connection added emotional tension and risk, as the presence of someone outside the family could accelerate dangerous discoveries or put lives in danger. As the subplots unfolded, the mansion seemed to react to the heir's every move. Jonathan wasn't just dealing with physical or psychological obstacles. He was facing the complex interplay between past and present, between loyalty and betrayal, between curiosity and danger. Each decision triggered immediate consequences, subtly intertwined with the actions of secondary characters, creating a web of tension that heightened the suspense without losing focus on the main conflict. The combination of personal subplots, temporal pressures, and ancient secrets gave the narrative depth, showing that Jonathan's disappearance was merely the culmination of a cycle that had been repeating itself for generations. Each character had their own motivation, each architectural detail carried meaning, and each seemingly isolated clue connected to a larger enigma. The mansion, in this context, was not just a setting, but an active character, manipulating events and challenging all who dared to explore it. That night, Jonathan sensed a different presence in the mansion. It wasn't just the wind whispering through the hallways, nor the usual creaking of the old floorboards. There was something more, something that seemed to follow his steps, silent and almost intelligent. As he descended to the basement, he noticed a faint light escaping through a crack in one of the doors that had been locked for decades. Curiosity overcame fear. He carefully turned the doorknob, and the door opened with a creak that echoed through the hallway, breaking the silence of the night. Inside, the room was empty, except for a small, dusty table in the center. On it, a sealed envelope bearing the ancient Whitaker family crest looked freshly placed. Jonathan picked it up, feeling a mixture of excitement and apprehension. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the seal. Inside, he found a letter that not only detailed ancient family secrets, but mentioned his own name, as if someone knew he would be there that night. The letter revealed that the previous disappearances were no accidents. Each heir who dared to uncover certain family secrets was destined to confront a will left by their ancestors, an enigma that could seal their fate or reveal a truth that would change everything. Jonathan realized that his own disappearance had been orchestrated for years, perhaps decades, as part of a cycle the family tried to hide from the world. As he processed the revelation, the room began to change. The shadows on the walls lengthened, taking on almost human forms. A cold breeze swept through the room, and objects began to move on their own. Jonathan felt his heart race, but also a strange clarity. Everything he had experienced up to that moment made sense within a larger pattern, and the mansion seemed to be leading him to that endpoint. At that moment, a metallic sound echoed behind him. Turning quickly, Jonathan realized that the door he had entered through had closed by itself, locking him inside the room. The tension reached its peak. He tried to open the door, but it was firmly closed, as if the mansion itself decided who could leave. The letter in his hands now seemed like a symbolic key to deciphering not only the family's secrets, but his own destiny. The major turning point came when Jonathan discovered a secret compartment in the desk. Inside, there was an old diary belonging to an ancestor who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The diary contained enigmatic instructions, maps of the mansion with hidden passages, and notes about future events, as if someone had foreseen the heir's every move. Jonathan realized he wasn't just investigating the past, he was being led to something planned long ago, a macabre enigma that only he could solve. As he examined the diary, he heard footsteps approaching the hallway, even though he knew the entrance was locked. The tension reached a new level when a shadow crossed the glass door of the room, but without a defined shape, almost spectral. Jonathan felt a shock of fear and determination. For the first time, he realized that the mansion was not just a setting or a repository of secrets. It was active, manipulating the time, space, and perception of each person who dared to confront it. The invisible presence began to interact more directly. Objects moved, candles lit themselves, and an old clock began to tell times that didn't exist. Every detail reinforced the feeling that time in the mansion didn't follow normal rules and that Jonathan was about to experience something irreversible. He needed to decipher the diary and find a way out before the cycle of disappearances repeated itself with him. While following coded instructions in the diary, Jonathan discovered a hidden passage behind a false bookcase. The subterranean corridor revealed engraved symbols, locked doors and small compartments, each containing artifacts and documents from missing ancestors. The magnitude of the truth finally began to weigh on him. The disappearances were not mere coincidences, but part of a carefully orchestrated family legacy, involving secrets that could shatter reputations and destroy lives. The turning point culminates when Jonathan finds a central room where all the elements, documents, symbols, and artifacts converge into a single enigma. He realizes that the disappearance of each previous heir was linked to specific decisions that could alter the outcome. The heir needed to choose, continue the cycle and disappear, or break the pattern, confronting unknown forces that had guarded the mansion's secrets for generations. The tension, mystery, and risk now reached their peak, creating a suspenseful scenario that would completely change the direction of the narrative. The silence in the mansion after the turning point was almost deafening. Jonathan remained in the central room, breathing heavily, trying to process the magnitude of what he had just discovered. Every object, every document, and every symbol seemed to carry an urgent message, as if the mansion itself demanded an immediate response. He felt the weight of generations on his shoulders, the responsibility of breaking the cycle of disappearances, or inadvertently becoming part of it. When Margaret realized Jonathan wasn't returning to his room, she began to act. For the first time, her instructions were more direct, yet still shrouded in mystery. She silently guided Thomas and other servants through labyrinthine corridors, trying to locate the heir. The fear was palpable, not only because of the physical danger, but also because of the emotional impact the revelation of the truth could have on Jonathan. Each of her decisions had a direct impact, creating tension between the need to protect and the imperative to reveal secrets. Meanwhile, Jonathan moved through the room, examining secret passages indicated in the diary. He began to notice patterns. The ancient symbols, the arrangement of the furniture, and even the seemingly random objects were part of a larger puzzle. Each discovery had immediate consequences. A lever moved incorrectly could lock doors, close passages, and completely alter his escape route. The environment reacted to the heir's actions, making him aware that his movements needed to be calculated with precision. Thomas, outside, discreetly observed, noticing that the mansion was more unstable than ever. Noises, shadows, and drafts indicated that the house's ancient mechanisms, perhaps linked to Victorian architecture and secret constructions, were responding to Jonathan's presence and actions. Every step Jonathan took caused side effects that affected not only his own safety, but also that of anyone who ventured into the same space. Jonathan's emotional reactions were intense. The thrill of uncovering ancient secrets quickly mixed with fear, anxiety, and distrust. He began to question whether he could trust Margaret and Thomas, or if each of their actions was part of a larger plot. At the same time, the realization that he was being tested by previous generations forced him to confront limits he never imagined existed. Each discovery brought new doubts, increasing the psychological pressure. The mansion, as an active antagonist, continued to intervene. Doors that were once secure now seemed locked by invisible forces. Passages that Jonathan thought he knew transformed, revealing hidden corridors and secret chambers. The environment responded to his decisions, making the tension constant and forcing the heir to act strategically. Every mistake had direct consequences, as if the house were alive and determined to test his ability to overcome the family's macabre legacy. Beyond the physical pressure, the discoveries began to affect the relationships between the characters. Margaret became more vulnerable, revealing genuine concern for Jonathan's safety, but also fear of the repercussions if the family secrets were exposed. Thomas, though silent, showed signs of frustration and anxiety, aware that any wrong move could trigger dangerous events. These reactions added layers of complexity, showing that the consequences of the turning point were not limited to Jonathan, but reverberated throughout everyone connected to the mansion. The heir also began to deal with the indirect effects of the turning point. The perception of time seemed distorted, sounds and shadows became more intense, and the feeling of isolation increased. Every action had an almost immediate repercussion, reinforcing the idea that the mansion was not just a setting, but an active participant in the narrative. Jonathan needed to balance courage, reasoning, and instinct to survive and continue his search for the truth. At the end of this phase, Jonathan understood that the turning point had changed everything. He was no longer just investigating the family mysteries. He was directly involved in the cycle of disappearances, facing physical, psychological, and emotional consequences that tested his determination and intelligence. Every choice would become crucial, and every action a step toward an outcome that could be surprising and irreversible. Jonathan felt that the mansion tested not only his courage, but also his reasoning ability. The turning point had placed him in a vulnerable position, but it had also revealed an inner strength he didn't know he possessed. Every corridor, every locked door, and every shadow that appeared before his eyes demanded decisive and strategic action. He needed to learn to interpret subtle signs, to distinguish what was real from what seemed illusory, and to use his inherited knowledge to survive and move forward. The first major lesson came when Jonathan discovered that the mansion followed almost mathematical patterns in its secret passages. By observing ancient symbols engraved on the walls, he realized that each mark corresponded to a specific corridor or hidden compartment. He began to record every detail, creating a mental and physical map that would help him navigate the labyrinth without relying on chance. This ability to observe and analyze became crucial, demonstrating a cognitive and strategic growth that transformed his vulnerability into strength. While exploring a new underground corridor, Jonathan encountered obstacles that demanded physical dexterity and courage. Doors locked by ancient mechanisms, fragile floors that threatened to collapse, and shadows that seemed to take shape before his eyes tested his resilience and his ability to remain calm under pressure. Each challenge overcome reinforced his confidence, but also deepened his respect for the danger the mansion represented. He learned to assess risks, plan movements, and act with precision, developing skills that no book or academic study could teach. The relationship with the secondary characters also evolved. Margaret ceased to be merely a keeper of secrets and became a strategic ally, guiding Jonathan more openly, albeit cautiously. Thomas, in turn, began to share crucial information about secret passages and ancient patterns in the mansion, partially trusting the heir's ability to decipher the enigmas without putting himself in danger. The interaction between them changed. Before there was tension and distrust. Now there was collaboration and mutual learning, showing how extreme pressure can transform relationships and strengthen alliances. Jonathan also began to deal with his inner fears more directly. The dread of disappearing, like his predecessors, transformed into motivation to understand the patterns of the mansion. Every risky step was measured, every decision weighed, and he learned to recognize signs he had previously ignored. His personal growth manifested not only in courage, but also in emotional intelligence and the ability to remain calm in the face of macabre and unpredictable situations. The mansion continued to be an active antagonist, but Jonathan began to understand it better. He realized that the riddles, traps, and signs were not merely threats, but carefully designed lessons to test heirs. By correctly interpreting the signs, he was able to open doors, avoid traps, and advance toward the truth, demonstrating progressive maturity. This transformation was visible. From a curious and impulsive young man, Jonathan became a meticulous investigator, capable of facing the unknown with rationality and courage. New challenges arose when he found a partially flooded room with documents and objects floating in cold, murky water. It was a test of physical endurance and patience, as any rash movement could destroy essential evidence or block his exit. Jonathan had to coordinate his breathing, strength, and reasoning, solving small puzzles within the room to unlock doors and find important objects. Each obstacle overcome strengthened his determination and showed that he was ready to face the final phase of the mystery. Jonathan's evolution also involved an awareness of family patterns. He began to understand that each previous disappearance had not occurred merely by coincidence, but due to strategic decisions and misinterpretations. Understanding this macabre legacy allowed him to anticipate traps and manipulate the environment to his advantage, transforming knowledge into a tool for survival and control over his own destiny. By the end of this phase, Jonathan was no longer just a curious heir. He had become someone capable of confronting the mansion's darkest secrets. His actions were now calculated, his reasoning sharp, and his courage tested. This personal and strategic growth prepared him for the next stage of the narrative, the preparation for the climax, where every skill acquired and every lesson learned would be crucial to confronting the greater mystery of the Whittaker family. Whittaker Manor had never felt so oppressive. Every corridor now carried the weight of everything Jonathan had discovered, ancient secrets, unsolved enigmas, and the constant feeling that time and space within the house did not obey normal rules. He knew the climax was approaching, and every step needed to be calculated, every action precise, and every decision strategic. Margaret and Thomas became key allies during this phase. Margaret, with her experience and knowledge of the family's ancient secrets, discreetly guided Jonathan, warning him about traps or potentially fatal passages. Thomas, in turn, revealed details about the workings of the mansion, patterns that Jonathan could use to his advantage. Their collaboration was no longer based on blind trust, but on mutual understanding and synchronicity. Each of their actions directly influenced the heir's progress. The secondary subplots began to resolve themselves naturally. Jonathan's friendship, previously just a source of tension, proved crucial. Small actions by this friend inadvertently unlocked passages or provided clues that accelerated Jonathan's understanding of the mansion's enigma. Margaret finally revealed her genuine concern for the young man, showing that her secrets and warnings were intended to protect, not manipulate. Thomas, on the other hand, confirmed that he was ready to act in conjunction with Jonathan, becoming a decisive strategic support. The atmosphere of the mansion intensified the pressure. The dim lights, the narrow corridors, and the doors that seemed to shift position created a constant sense of urgency. Small details, such as shadows that moved independently of the lighting, displaced objects, or subtle noises, reminded Jonathan that he was not only dealing with physical obstacles, but with forces that defied his perception. Each element reinforced the tension, setting the stage for the approaching climax. Jonathan began reviewing all the clues he had collected, symbols engraved on the walls, old letters and diaries, maps of the mansion, and patterns in previous disappearances. He realized that everything pointed to a central room, a point where all the enigmas converged. It was a place where past and present met, and where critical decisions would need to be made. Mental and physical preparation became as important as the ability to decipher the secrets. As he progressed, Jonathan faced final obstacles designed to test his courage and reasoning. Partially blocked passages, ancient mechanisms that demanded extreme attention, and subtle signs left by vanished predecessors formed a series of consecutive challenges. Each obstacle was a practical lesson. He needed to remain calm, observe details, and apply the knowledge acquired in the previous stages of the narrative. Each correct action increased his confidence. Each mistake could be catastrophic. The emotional tension also intensified. Jonathan understood that his choices would determine not only his fate, but also the future of the mansion and the legacy of the Whittaker family. He began to reflect on each decision, weighing the consequences and possible ramifications. The psychological pressure combined with the physical pressure, creating a sense of urgency and gravity that made the atmosphere almost palpable. Margaret and Thomas, though essential, now needed to step back to allow Jonathan to make final decisions. They provided crucial instructions and strategic warnings, but they knew the true test was individual. Jonathan needed to apply everything he had learned and confront the entire estate. The balance between outside help and his own actions became the key to the heir's success. As he approached the central room, Jonathan realized that each previous choice had prepared the ground for the final confrontation. The subplots were aligned, the enigmas connected logically, and the lessons learned transformed each obstacle into an opportunity. The mansion, silent and almost conscious, awaited his decision, testing every instinct and every piece of knowledge he had acquired. At the end of this phase, the narrative reached its peak of tension. Jonathan was ready to face the climax. Armed with experience, knowledge, and strategic allies, he would confront not only the mysteries of the mansion, but also his own family legacy in a decisive moment that would define his destiny and bring an end to the cycle of disappearances. Jonathan finally reached the central room, the heart of the Whittaker mansion, where all the enigmas, symbols, and passages converged. The atmosphere was both majestic and terrifying. Ancient candles flickered, casting unsettling shadows. The air held a musty smell, mixed with wax and old paper, and the silence was broken only by the whisper of invisible currents that seemed to move with a consciousness of their own. He knew that every step, every gesture, and every decision in that room could determine his fate, and possibly break the cycle of his family's disappearances. In the center of the room, a large wooden box rested on a stone pedestal. It was covered in symbols that Jonathan had already studied in diaries and maps. It was the focal point of all the enigmas. Opening that box would mean confronting the truth that the mansion had guarded for generations. As he approached, he felt an intense pressure in his chest, as if the space itself were conspiring against him. Every shadow seemed to come alive, every sound turned into an alert, and the mansion seemed to anticipate his movements. With extreme care, Jonathan began to decipher the engraved symbols. They weren't just ancient inscriptions, they were coded instructions demanding logic, perception, and courage. Each mistake triggered mechanisms that caused doors to lock, objects to fall, or corridors to shift. The tension reached its peak, and he felt genuine fear, but also a growing determination. The only way to survive and uncover the truth was to face the challenge fully. While he worked to open the box, Margaret and Thomas remained nearby, but out of reach of the central room. They could offer support, but not interfere. Jonathan needed to act alone. The psychological pressure was enormous, but each obstacle overcome in the previous stages of the narrative had prepared him for this moment. He applied reasoning, observation, and intuition simultaneously, connecting information from documents, maps, and familiar patterns. When the box finally gave way, it revealed not only old documents and records of disappearances, but also an artifact that seemed to be the physical key to the macabre cycle. An old clock with exposed gears, marked with symbols that Jonathan recognized as patterns repeated throughout the mansion. It was evident that the clock acted as a catalyst, keeping the cycle of disappearances in motion. He realized that only by manipulating the mechanism correctly could he interrupt the sequence that had already cost the lives of so many heirs. The next instant, the mansion reacted violently. Doors slammed shut, candles went out, and shadows began to move almost consciously. Jonathan felt the urge to act quickly, applying everything he had learned to interpret the symbols and manipulate the clock. Every second counted, and the atmosphere seemed to resist every attempt to break the cycle. The suspense reached extreme levels, and the reader feels the tension of every choice, every movement, and every potential mistake. A decisive turning point occurred when Jonathan realized that the symbols on the clock not only corresponded to patterns in the mansion, but also to the characters' positions within the space. Margaret and Thomas, by positioning themselves in the correct spots, activated mechanisms that aided in opening the artifact. This unexpected synchronization was the key to success. Without collaboration, Jonathan would not be able to solve the enigma. This moment highlights the importance of the alliances built throughout the narrative and reinforces the development of the secondary characters. With precision, Jonathan adjusted the clock, combining logic and intuition. As he turned the last hand to the exact point indicated by the patterns, there was absolute silence. Then a deep sound echoed through the corridors. Locked doors opened, fallen objects returned to their original places, and the mansion seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The cycle of disappearances had finally been broken, and Jonathan realized that his courage, intelligence, and resilience had transformed not only his destiny, but also the legacy of the Whittaker family. The central room was now quiet, but it carried an air of reverence. Jonathan held the documents and the artifact, understanding that he had uncovered a secret that spanned generations. The climax was not only physical, but symbolic. He had faced the fear, the psychological pressure, and the enigmas of the mansion, emerging transformed and victorious. The macabre tension finally gave way to a sense of resolution, without losing the emotional intensity that had driven the entire narrative. As he walked toward the exit of the central room, Jonathan looked around, realizing that the mansion, once menacing, now seemed satisfied with his triumph. He was no longer just a curious heir. He had become someone capable of understanding and controlling the enigmas of his own lineage. The climax concluded the main cycle of suspense, mystery, and danger, preparing the narrative for the emotional conclusion and epilogue that would show the effects of his actions. The Whittaker mansion, silent after the climax, seemed to finally rest. Jonathan walked through the now familiar corridors, noticing each detail with renewed attention. The shadows, once menacing, seemed inert, the whispers of the past silenced. He carried with him the documents and the artifact that symbolized the end of the cycle of disappearances, concrete proof that courage, reasoning, and perseverance could confront even the oldest and darkest secrets of the family. Margaret, usually reserved and enigmatic, approached with a look of relief. For the first time, she revealed that despite decades of silence, she had been rooting for Jonathan's success. Her presence now was one of partnership, not just surveillance. Thomas, on the other hand, breathed with lessened tension, showing that his role as observer and guardian of family traditions was finally reaching a positive conclusion. Their relationship had evolved. Fear had given way to trust, and suspense had transformed into mutual respect. The heir realized that the mansion, though macabre, was not an enemy to all who inhabited it. It only punished those who did not understand its secrets or acted recklessly. By deciphering the riddles and acting intelligently, Jonathan not only saved himself, but also interrupted the cycle that had haunted generations. The feeling of triumph was intense, but accompanied by silent reflection. Every action within the mansion had profound consequences, and the responsibility of keeping or revealing the secrets would weigh on him from then on. As he left the central room, Jonathan noticed subtle details that had previously gone unnoticed. Symbols engraved in the corridors, hidden passages that now remained open, and carefully rearranged documents. It was as if the mansion recognized its victory and reorganized its mysteries so that they would remain, but safely, without threatening future heirs. The balance between suspense and security was now restored, showing that even in the most macabre environment, order could prevail. Jonathan felt a clear inner transformation. He was no longer just a curious young man exploring his family's heritage. He had become someone capable of facing the unknown, interpreting complex signs, and acting courageously in the face of danger. Each challenge overcome, each enigma deciphered, had shaped not only his skills, but also his perception of legacy, responsibility, and courage. The experience at Whittaker Manor had marked his definitive maturation. As he left the mansion, the cold night on the American estate seemed calmer, though it still carried echoes of the past. The disappearance that threatened to repeat itself had finally been stopped. Jonathan looked at the horizon, understanding that the mystery that had once terrified the Whittaker family was now under control, and that the truth, though dark, had been revealed. The story reached a satisfying conclusion, maintaining the suspense, but offering emotional and narrative resolution. The conclusion highlighted that Jonathan's victory was not merely physical or intellectual, but symbolic. He broke generational patterns, transformed fear into knowledge, and showed that even the most macabre mysteries can be overcome with courage and strategy. The family legacy now carried hope, and the protagonist emerged as someone capable of confronting the past without being lost to it. Months later, Jonathan visited the mansion frequently, but no longer as an intruder or a fearful heir. He walked the corridors with respect and knowledge, now guarding the Whittaker family secrets. Margaret and Thomas remained by his side, maintaining order on the property. Even so, the mansion held unrevealed enigmas, shadows that seemed to watch from forgotten corners. Jonathan knew that, although he had overcome the cycle of disappearances, the Whittaker story would never be fully concluded. Some mysteries remained, patiently waiting for someone who dared to confront them again. If you were intrigued by the secrets of the Whittaker mansion and wanted to unravel each mystery along with Jonathan, share your opinion in the comments. What detail did you notice before the heir? Have you imagined how you would react to macabre enigmas and secret passages like these? Like and share this story so that more people can learn about the terrifying and fascinating history of the Whittaker family. Subscribe so you don't miss new episodes and macabre mysteries that challenge the courage and intelligence of the characters. The adventure is just beginning, and the next secret may be even more surprising.